Hey, welcome to Web3 Weekly with your host, Blockstar Technology.
Let's go.
Hi everyone, we're here for the 61st episode and first one for 2024. I'm here with Michael Fitzgerald. Michael, would you like to do an introduction about yourself and your book here, The Monero Standard?
Sure. So I'm always really bad at introducing myself. I started working in crypto back in 2015, 2016. I got into crypto in 2015, 2016, just in Bitcoin. Obviously back then, nobody knew about Bitcoin. You'd ask people like your parents or someone in the street or a friend what they know about Bitcoin. They'd say, what's Bitcoin, right? The important thing, the sort of important ethos that I took from Bitcoin back in the time was that it was something really special. It was like a actual money outside the monetary system, which gave you actual autonomy over your expression, your financial freedom, your freedom of expression. And that was the real ethos that I took out of like what was the Bitcoin community back then and the actual use cases for Bitcoin back then, which wasn't much. It was mainly just a lot of darknet related stuff and all that kind of stuff. Fast forward, whenever you discover anything new in the world, you generally speaking don't just drop everything and, go headfirst into it. So I was working at Dan Murphy's at the time.
Yep.
I continued working at Dan Murphy's for however long after that. But long story short, I ended up getting my first job in crypto to crypto miners in 2018, like the middle of the bear market, December 2018, middle of the bear market. And since then, I mean, in regards to my crypto sort of journey, one thing's just led to another, right? So that was the middle of the bear market. Then we also had the bull market. I've worked for a few different jobs in the time, and I'm now basically a producer for a Bitcoin YouTuber. So.
Oh, okay, awesome. So you're on the producer editing skills.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So going back to 2015-16, I know that's when I first become aware of Bitcoin and crypto, and there was no information out there back then for anyone wanting to get in. Was some places down in like Sydney and Brisbane sort of, but didn't quite get into it. But what gave you that real interest to dig deeper and understand Bitcoin? Because I remember it must have been 2015.
Mm-hmm.
It had crashed down to like $250 from the 1,200, and people were saying, "Oh, it's digital gold." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting. Like it'll go back to 1,200 because gold's 1,200." Little behold, I actually really dug in 2000, end of 2017, start of 18, coming into the next bear market where it had hit 20. And I'm like, all right, what is this stuff like? How did it hit 20 grand from bloody 250?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm sort of very ideologically driven. And I think like the real power that kind of Bitcoin back then gave to me, or just people who use Bitcoin, was what really got me interested in it. That whole like sort of cypherpunk mentality of being outside the state and still free and essentially able to do what you want in a way. So that was like a main driving reason, if you call it that. But it was probably only when I started working at the crypto mining company that I actually started to really understand more about what actually money is, you know what I mean? That old question, like, what is money, right?
Yeah.
So it's only through that journey that I actually started understanding what money is, understanding the whole bigger, call it financial system, call it the monetary system. It was only when I sort of understood that I started to really see the true power that Bitcoin, what was Bitcoin, back in 2015, 2016, that whole cypherpunk money, what I think is now Monero, that sort of gave me that whole perspective of where everything fits.
Yes. That was coming into my next question, that transition from Bitcoin into you getting heavy into the Monero ecosystem. How did that come around? Was that at the Bitcoin mining job or?
That was probably more of a, actually outside of work, more of a kind of a light bulb moment actually. And it would have been only over the last few years where, as I said, you could actually have monetary freedom through Bitcoin. To cut it short, I mean, like the privacy that Monero gives you. There was actually a few sort of light bulb moments. I was previously a Bitcoin maximalist, by the way. So there was me actually using Monero for the first time, and it's, when you send a transaction, whether it's on Uniswap or send Bitcoin to somebody, you check like the status of the transaction, like where is this money,
Yep.
And obviously Monero is private, right? So you go on the blockchain and it just shows nothing. And so there's a real light bulb moment in that where I thought there's got to be more to this, and then it was probably just going down the so-called rabbit hole, just watching podcast after podcast after podcast, just trying to learn as much as I could about why it's good, why it's bad, all those kind of things. And there was one specific podcast, it's called Monero Talk. You may or may not know it. And the guest on there was called Mono Crypto. And Mono sort of really framed up the shortcomings of Bitcoin, the problems Monero fixes, and sort of how you see that in the whole bigger, call it like a globalist movement, the whole sort of impending technocracy that we have with CBDCs coming in, with digital IDs coming in, social credit scores, carbon credit scores coming in. So that was kind of like the transition, if you will. It's important. Like, I'm not a maximalist in any kind. Like, I don't consider myself a Monero maximalist.
Yep.
I would have called myself a Bitcoin maximalist previously. But what I think is most important now is probably two concepts that we talk about a lot in the book is freedom and prosperity. And that's what the Monero standard is about, is how we can use money to build a long-lasting platform for freedom and prosperity.
Yeah, and you see actually like the core essence of Monero with that privacy. I'll let you explain it a bit more, but having the stealth addresses and the ring signatures.
Yep.
It's what sort of like you would see what Satoshi sort of wanted, but obviously Bitcoin was earlier and there was a bit of iterations, and then I believe Monero was forked from Bytecoin, which was the open source cypherpunk mentality. And then I can't remember exactly what happened with Bytecoin, but Monero upgraded again, got that step better. And it's lasted, well, the test of time in crypto, if it lasts more than one bear market and it's still going, sure. It's pretty good. And us in the Western world, we don't really understand a lot of the privacy and having control of your own money. But when you go to some third world countries or underneath a dictatorship, having that privacy is very powerful.
Definitely. And that really goes to show that, like, as you said, if it lasts more than one bear market, usually means there's something to it, right?
Yep.
And we see Monero providing that role, say, for example, on the dark nets. I mean, the dark nets are pretty much all Monero only. Some are Monero and Bitcoin. There's actually a couple that are Bitcoin only, but I think they're just honeypots, like police traps, basically.
Yep.
So we do see this actually playing out in time where, those who are actually under, say, oppressive circumstances are actually choosing to adopt Monero, and it's evidently working in society, right?
Yep. Interesting one is, and just to take back a step, what's his name? Fluffy Pony? Fluffy Pony, where has he been these days? Like, I believe you would have been watching a lot of him.
Not really, to be honest, because I think it's kind of irrelevant from the actual, kind of like what happened to Satoshi kind of question. Like, we know who Fluffy Pony is, right?
They go away and...
Yeah, I know he's under investigation for fraud of some description in his country, South Africa.
Okay, yep.
I don't know. I remember looking into it at the time, thinking it was like a bit trumped up, but I couldn't tell you right now what it was for. But it's, I think, relating to a previous business, but I don't really know.
Yeah. Me neither. I just it used to be quite active in 2018, 19, 20, and not so much anymore.
Yep, he stepped away. He's got his own things. He started his own project called Tari, I think it's called, like a new sort of Web3 whatever project, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so he stepped away from it.
Yeah. So for anyone that's watching, could you sort of explain the differences, I guess, to like a Bitcoin or Ethereum, to a Monero using those stealth addresses or ring signatures? And a follow-up question to that would be, with the not double spend, but if there was ever a bug in Monero
Yep.
for the increased supply or people being able to mint extra coins,
Yep.
how does Monero defend against that? Sure. Which is a question I actually don't know.
It's actually really. I'll preface this with I'm not a cryptographer, and cryptography related. I'm an idiot. Don't listen to me.
yeah.
But this is what I do know, right? There is something called a Pedersen commitment, which is where you commit to a value between two certain numbers, and you're able to prove that without actually proving. It goes back to like the zero knowledge.
Knowledge proof.
So you're able to prove that number's in there without actually revealing what that number is.
What that number is.
Which is the amount that you're sending in the transaction, right?
Yep.
So by essentially having all the previous Pedersen commitments and the range proofs, which is another word for it, you're able to essentially run your node, verify that the supply is, again, not double spendable because you've committed all throughout history that those are what the numbers is. So all you're doing is you're relying that the implementation of the cryptography is correct.
Yep.
As you are with Bitcoin too. For example, like you're implying that the implementation of elliptic curve cryptography is correct. Because if it wasn't correct, then the whole UTXO set is irrelevant, for example.
Yep.
So a lot of Bitcoiners say, yeah, but you're trusting the implementation of the cryptography. Yeah, but you're also trusting, that's what maths is. You trust that it works, right?
Yeah.
And when you see that a plane flies, and when you see that Monero continues to remain private, and when you see that you're able to run your own node and, verify the supply yourself, you're able to see that it works.
Yep.
What was the first part of the question?
Sort of the stealth addresses and the ring signatures, and we get a lot of people that also aren't cryptographers. We may have a couple that are.
Sure.
But explaining that difference of how that technology works compared to like Bitcoin or Ethereum, where obviously they're traceable all the way through.
It's honestly very simple. I mean, so ring signatures, for example, when you submit a Bitcoin transaction or an Ethereum transaction, you just basically publish your address on chain, right? So the way ring signatures work is technically when you actually go and look at the Monero blockchain, you actually technically see your stealth address there, right?
Yep.
And stealth address is the one that's...
one-time use.
Right. So you actually see yours there. But it's currently 1 out of 16, so you have 16 or 15 others plus you. And it's through that, it's essentially impossible to distinguish which one is which, right? Because they all have the exact same probability of being the sender in the first place. So it's essentially like a hide in the crowd sort of mentality.
Yep.
Whereas something like Zcash is, and people always grill me saying like, oh, Monero has zero knowledge proofs. But what I refer to as a zero knowledge proof would be, again, proving something without actually revealing what it is. And I know Zcash, essentially, they're able to prove that the sender authorized the sending of the funds, but not actually reveal who that is, which I think is better than having 16 addresses and one of them's correct.
Yeah. And I believe Zcash has also got like a master key, I think they call it, where they can follow about 10 transactions forward.
Well, look, I don't know anything about that specifically. I know when Zcash was set up, they did have like a master key, which basically unlocked the cryptography from what I understand. They've since forked away from that, and they have, obviously with the advancement of cryptography, they've found a new implementation that doesn't require trust, right?
Yep.
That's how Snowden came into the whole Zcash thing, was he was one of the people with the keys who they allegedly destroyed, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, Zcash doesn't require any trust from, essentially, there's no one who can, as far as I know, unlock the cryptography. But it is transparent by default, so it's optionally private. Whereas Monero is private by default.
Private by default.
Big difference. Very easy to stuff it up with Zcash when you forget to click a button, for example.
Yeah.
Or, importantly, someone sending you money forgets to click a button, which is, again, a big potential problem.
Yeah. Where you'll share that address and...
your privacy is in their hands at that point.
In their hands, yeah. And also the other interesting thing Monero has is there's actually no set block size, is there?
Correct. No,
there's like, if it goes over a certain size, it's sort of like a penalty to the miners, is it? How does that? I won't do it justice.
No, that's a pretty good summing up of it. So I actually forget what the block size, like the nominal block size is, but basically when it goes over that, the miner can choose to accept those transactions into the block. The caveat to that is when they accept an expanded block, they actually give away the block reward, so the 0.6 Monero every 2 minutes, every block.
Yep.
So theoretically, the fees from the expanded block have to outweigh the block reward for it to be economically viable, right?
Yeah.
So, but that goes to show like a whole. One of the key things that the Monero core, the Monero devs focused on is that scalability to like essentially a whole world. There's a whole lot of opinions, right? Some people think, Monero is not going to be adopted by everyone. Some people think it is, but it's not going to be on layer 1. Some people think it's all going to be on layer 1, but there's a whole lot of sort of range in opinions. I don't have any strong opinions myself. But point being is that it can scale to a large amount of people on the base layer itself. So, which I think is important for freedom, if you will, because Bitcoin obviously has massive limitations. We're seeing the penalties of that now with expanded, fees for sending transactions, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Bitcoin is so much nuance, right? Like Bitcoin is say about Lightning Network, I would say back, well, it's not actually a second layer. It's a completely different network that's not your own Bitcoin, for example.
Well, the devs don't want to change anything. They're always worried of touching anything on the it's like the sun that we all revolve around, and do not blow up the sun.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And that's kind of good. Like, I actually think the Bitcoin ethos is really good in that way. Like, they're very slow and methodical rather than work fast and break things, which has its purpose. With a global monetary system, you would want that. You wouldn't want people changing it all the time because it's your money after all. You don't want the monetary policy changing, right? Like we see in fiat. That's the problem we're solving. But there is obviously downsides to that too.
Yeah, and that's interesting because what we're seeing at the moment is ordinals cramming into the Bitcoin network, which is causing problems, which exchanges have moved to a few exchanges moved to the Lightning network.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that when that block size gets too big, it's uneconomical for the people mining. So does that mean those blocks just wouldn't get processed?
It would just be in the next block, for example. Those transactions will put in the next block.
Yep, and get cut down into smaller chunks to do it. So what would something like ordinals look like on Monero? It would be similar to Bitcoin, or?
It's a funny question because there was the same thing that came out when ordinals came out. Was it like February, January last year?
Yeah,
something like that. And so Monero had the same sort of scripting that allowed more ordinals, which Monero called Mordinals. They did that for about a week and then forked away from it and said, this is a complete waste of block space and go do it on another chain, basically.
Yeah.
This is private digital cash. So it has been done and it's been actively rejected, which I think is actually a really good thing for a digital money. I don't think you need JPEGs on a digital money.
No. It is funny,
Right.
but I'm dirty. Me and Cozzy went to get a Bitcoin Punk.
Okay.
As I released it, and we were mucking around, and we had other stuff going on. It was during office hours, and we're like, we'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
They minted out, and they're like 20 Bitcoin or something, and the next day, and we're like, just another generational wealth opportunity missed. Time to find the next one.
Yeah. Time back to work tomorrow.
Yeah. Which comes in, Michael. How did you? What was the idea? Did you just wake up one morning and go, you know what, I'm going to write the Monero standard? Or you're like, hey, you know what, Anton Apanopoulos, he's done the Bitcoin, he's done the Ethereum. I'm going to get to Monero before he does.
No, it was more actually, so the book itself, like the idea for the book kind of was, like I say, a few light bulb moments sort of coming together, and it's sort of the whole picture of where Monero sits in the world today, to sum it up. Sort of just made a lot of sense, and I feel like it had to be shared, for lack of a better word. The actual name, the Monero standard itself, is kind of just a play from the Bitcoin standard, right? Like the whatever standard is like a familiar phrase that people know, right? So I thought that it's also, like, I read the Bitcoin standard in February 2021, I think. So when I actually started writing it, I thought, like, I have to read the Bitcoin standard before I finish, kind of just make sure I covered everything off. But as time went on, I thought, I think it's actually best not to read the Bitcoin standard because you kind of risk like copying a lot of concepts just for the sake of copying it.
Yeah.
So in that regards, like, it's completely separate from the Bitcoin standard. I'm sure there's a lot of sort of I know, for example, I remember the main sort of concepts from the Bitcoin standard and the sort of same structure in that we talk about money, right? We talk about the problems with money, and then we talk about like the solutions, right? So the thing about the Monero standard is there's just a couple extra things that are not put in there in the Bitcoin standard. Say, for example, globalism, technocracy. I don't think Bitcoin really accounts for the potential problems we see with CBDCs and the fight. Like, for example, when you have an entire global power structure built on fiat, built on like upheld by the fiat monetary system, Bitcoin just coming in and taking that out, it's not going to go lightly, right? Like every empire without history always becomes more irrational and more desperate as they become closer to their demise, right?
Yep.
So...
Changing World Powers, Ray Dalio?
Yes. Right.
Nice. It's a good book.
It is great. Yeah, actually, great read. I highly recommend it. But so Bitcoin, for example, I don't think has the real longevity and strength to stand up against the fight back, what I call the fight back against, an alternative money, against real money, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's sort of just a synopsis.
Yeah, and you see ETF recently, governments have, I bet you America's spewing. I remember years ago, it must have been 16, what was it, Max Kaiser, the government, US government auctioned off all their Silk Road Bitcoins,
Yep.
which would be worth a hell of a lot more today.
Definitely.
But yeah, Bitcoin, you see a lot of people moving in. Like you've got Michael Saylor, how much Bitcoin he owns.
Yep.
You've now got these big asset managers moving in with, I believe it was like $6 billion moving within the ETFs. Which you sort of come to a centralization there, not including, people can go in and argue, but you've got your mining pools, so your massive mining pools. I know Monero is a lot more decentralized like that, and a lot of these people, I can't see BlackRock going to get into Monero with the privacy and risks with the laws that they would come under for that, and the due diligence as well, not being able to know where it came from before them.
Yeah, so that's a big thing, with the decentralized mining, for example, on Monero versus, for example, Bitcoin. And that's just a good example of like the fight back that we're talking about. So when you see people like Elizabeth Warren and her anti-crypto army, going on tirades, financial services committees trying to get people up and grandstand, make the best answers for her, right? So that fight back's going to come, and when you have regulations, for example, put on Bitcoin miners, not to mention that, for example, BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, they own a lot of the big Bitcoin miners like Riot Platforms, for example, or there's another one called Hive, I think.
Yeah.
They own a lot of these Bitcoin miners already through, their managed funds. So when that fight back's going to come and those regulations are put on Bitcoin miners to implement OFAC compliance lists, like ban certain people from interacting on Bitcoin,
which they've already done.
It's quite literally
a few times.
It would be illegal for them, obviously directly not to, but also through like their fiduciary responsibility to not do that too. So if you don't look after your investors, you're obviously breaking fiduciary responsibility. And I would say not following the law, getting your door kicked in, massive fines, is not in your best interest, but it's also a breach of your fiduciary responsibility to take care of the shareholders. So they're definitely going to implement all kinds of, say, blacklists, for example. So yeah, I mean, that's just one example of, but yeah, in regards to, say, for example, the ETF, like who's picking up Bitcoin right now? So I think you have your true believers, like your Michael Saylors, for example, but I would say a vast majority of people who have Bitcoin, including everyday people to now BlackRock, for example, they literally only buy it because they expect someone else to pay more for it than they did, right?
Yep.
And they all plan to sell it at some stage. Otherwise, I mean, a vast majority of their investments are fiat-minded investments, so they're only doing it because they expect the bigger idiot, right? And so Bitcoin will always work as we can argue nuance, like talk about in the book a lot. We can argue nuance about how effective it'll be, but it'll always work in terms of theoretically, you can always send money to somebody eventually, right?
Yeah.
But it's really through that, the centralization of so much of the infrastructure that's just one problem, for example, in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Speaking of Monero, like I got into it many years ago and went down the rabbit hole. You know, it's like the teapot mem where Bitcoin, and then you start learning economics, cryptography, everything else, and money. What is money, as we spoke about earlier? What have been some of the advancements that you could share with me and the people watching on the Monero? Like, has there been any big technology upgrades or rumors within the developer community of what's Monero's looking at doing, or are they pretty happy where they are?
I would say a combination of both. I would say they're pretty happy with where they are because it's not broken, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So the reason, for example, that Monero hasn't implemented something like Zcash's proofs of submitting addresses to the chain is because it's not broken. Don't fix it if it ain't broke kind of mentality.
Yep.
And that way, if it is broken, they always have the next step planned kind of thing. So government will always be playing a catch-up game.
Yeah.
I know over the years, for example, like so the hashing algorithm they use is called RandomX, which, as we were talking before the pod started about, how only CPUs can mine it. You can't use ASIC miners. So it used to be something where I believe ASIC miners could do it, but then they made it basically forked away from that.
I remember there's something happened. I thought there was a new algorithm, multi-algorithms, but you're saying they moved to more CPU
pretty much
mining, which...
There are tiny things too, like I know, for example, the blockchain was stored on RAM, which for most computers is probably, nowadays, it's probably 8 to 16 gigabytes, so the chain couldn't get bigger than that because it was stored on the limitation of the RAM, right?
Yep.
So back in the day, though, that was probably realistically a 4 gigabyte RAM, so the chain quite literally couldn't get bigger than 4 gigabytes without everybody upgrading their RAM, which is obviously very expensive to get continually more and more and more. So little problems like that, like storing it on like the data on the D drive, for example. There are, I know, plans to upgrade in the future. There's a thing they're working on called there's an upgrade called Seraphis, but I know before that, what's it called? Membership proofs, I believe it's called. So, for example, as we spoke before about about ring signatures is 1 in 16. So you've got you plus 15 others.
Yep.
It would be you and everybody else on the chain, right? So it's quite literally indistinguishable from everybody else on the chain.
Yeah.
So working on things like that at the moment.
Going to increase not even tenfold. That's unlimited.
The whole membership.
Everyone that's on that network.
Yep. And I know even more in the short term, I think they're... I preface this with it's a decentralized protocol. Anyone can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
But I think generally speaking, there's a consensus to upgrade it to 99 signatures in the ring. And then I believe with membership proofs, that has the whole entire chain.
Bit of A/B testing there and slowly move up.
Yeah, you know how these things are, right?
Yeah. And people do it in their own free time too.
That's right.
It's not as if someone's getting paid to work on Monero. They're actually passionate about it.
Yeah, a lot of the time.
Whatever the reasons may be.
Yep.
And they want to build some better technology and also see if they can do it as well.
That's right.
Yeah. So in the next, I don't know, we've got the Bitcoin happening in April, but in the next 4 to 8 years, where do you see Monero progressing? Because there always is the risk of Monero is on some major exchanges and some smaller ones. Mm-hmm. I, for one, still love that local Monero's around because, unfortunately, local Bitcoins closed down.
Yep.
Which peer-to-peer is what actually the cryptocurrencies were first designed for, rather than having all these middlemen. But where would you see the Monero ecosystem in 4 to 8 years?
That is a very good question. I'll preface it with, I can't predict the future.
Yeah.
But I think we can continue to see, we can analyze the trends that we have in society and sort of think about whether they're going to continue or reverse, right? And I think a lot of the trends we see in society are, less freedom. We're going to see more government control over, just not in terms of just direct regulation, but also in terms of like instruments like CBDCs, social credit scores or carbon credit scores. These kind of dystopian technologies. So I think Monero, actually, we can kind of already say that they know it is a threat because it's one of the very few coins that is not listed on a vast majority of exchanges for one reason or another, right?
Yep.
So it could be shadow ban from the banks. It could be direct prohibition in places like South Korea where privacy coins are illegal.
I did not know South Korea made privacy coins illegal.
It's weird. So I think we'll see, they already know it's a threat. That's why it's one of the very, very few that's banned I say banned loosely in a lot of ways.
And they are pretty far ahead, South Korea, in blockchain technology side compared to some other countries.
Sure, generally speaking. But I think, so they already know it's a threat. They're already cracking down on it. I think with the bigger problems we see in the world, so the fiat Ponzi sort of come into a head. We see with more dystopian technologies. I think Monero is going to play an increasingly important role in the world.
Yep.
How that manifests can be I don't predict the future kind of thing. That could manifest in a lot of different ways. That could be, for example, certain countries start collapsing, like we saw hyperinflation in Argentina. People in Argentina are already starting to adopt Monero. It could just remain on the dark net. It could just be a peer-to-peer thing. It could manifest in a whole lot of ways. But what I think is the most important thing is that Monero continues to provide freedom to all those who actually choose to use it. I think that's the most important thing. But you ever heard the saying, predictable events play out in unpredictable ways?
No.
So that's very much true. Like, we know that the world is going to become less free, more authoritarian. How that's going to play out, like what narratives they're going to make up, is pretty much anyone's guess.
Yeah.
They have an
what's his name? The Klaus Schwab.
Exactly right.
Jeez, he's got some ideas, doesn't he, that guy?
And we talk about a lot of that sort of stuff in the book too, and how so there's really two main problems we talk about in the book. There's a whole lot of other prefaces and setting precedents, for example. But the two main problems we talk about is the fiat Ponzi and the sort of frame it up as a global socialist movement. And the important thing to take away from that is the two concepts, both of which Monero have, that fix both of those problems. And the fiat Ponzi is, I think, summed up pretty well in Seyfedin's book, which proof of work, Bitcoin fixes that, right? A proof of work based money where you actually have to, you're limited by have to work, right? To actually create value for other people in order to obtain money. So proof of work fixes the fiat Ponzi. They can't print more Bitcoin, right?
Yep.
And privacy fixes that fight back from government, or that also fixes the ever-increasing problem we're seeing from the global socialist movement too. Which
I know a lot of my friends, I've been speaking about it for a few years, bits and pieces, but really only since COVID, people have sort of come in more front of mind, I would say, of what is possible. High inflation, which no one really cared about until you now go to the service station or the grocery store.
Yep.
Now everyone's talking about inflation, where beforehand it was, Argentina, Venezuela, and people in the West had no idea. Like, majority of my friends, a lot of them are heavy into crypto. Mm-hmm. No idea about it, or interest rates. And now since COVID and the printing of money, I see a lot more people talking about these cases, which then they're only a slight step away from the crypto community and wanting to do a bit of research.
For sure. I think most people, as you probably know, are complete idiots when it comes to economics, and actually even understanding, for example...
Me, I was one before getting into cryptocurrency. Right? I had no idea.
The thing is, we're not born understanding this, right? Like, you have to learn it from somewhere. And for most people, it's not an interest. Most people go to work every day and just come home, watch the news, and basically eat the shit that they're fed, kind of thing, on the news.
Yep.
A great example of that is what is even inflation? Like, the news talks about inflation being price increases, but that's not even the definition of inflation. Inflation is the increase of the monetary supply, right? Prices rise. Right. Prices rise as a consequence of inflation. So yeah, people are becoming more, aware of it and whatever, but I still think there's a long way to go.
And as they do that, and there's no more economic value, well, no work creating that value,
right?
It ends up going to the top side of town anyway. It goes to the top of the businesses, all the money, like Coles and Woolworths.
That's right.
everyone's getting the money handed to them, but where there's majority of that money for the stimulus checks or whatnot, well,
flows straight back.
Goes to the service stations or the grocery stores or whatever other store and goes straight back up to the top.
And look, people don't even care, right? Like, I mean, they do care. That's the thing is for example, you might hear on the propaganda, what I call propaganda, the news, right? What was it? A couple of weeks ago, a month ago, they heard, I think it was Telstra made $1 billion in profit or something like that. But people, first of all, make out like that's a big number. It's not even a big number. And secondly, it's government events like controlling the flow of money. Obviously, if they give it out in stimmy checks, for example, those people go away and that money filters to the corporations.
Yep.
Which, again, people forget those corporations are owned by people. They can own the corporation too, right? Through shares, publicly listed companies. So I think, the level of financial literacy out there is very poor, to say the least.
Yeah, they don't teach you too much about that in school, about money or avoid. No.
It makes sense too, because you know that old saying.
Offsetting taxes. I should word that. Minimizing taxes. That's the word I was looking for.
I mean, it makes sense too, because as I believe Henry Ford said in the 30s, if people actually understood the monetary system, there would be a revolution in the streets by the morning.
Yeah, and that was when it was still on the gold standard,
right.
wouldn't it? It'd still be on the gold
That's
standard.
That's exactly right. Long way to go.
Yeah, nice. So, where can we find your book for anyone out there that wants to buy the Monero Standard?
Yep.
Where can they find it, Michael?
Yeah, so if you want to grab a copy, there's two options. So you can pay in crypto, set Monero, temporarily disabled Bitcoin payments due to just a little problem. Ethereum, Doge, Zcash, most proof of work coins. You can get that on monerostandard.com. That'll get shipped out to you. Or if you want to pay in the dirty fiat, the dirty dollars, you can go on, if you're in Australia, go on Booktopia, for example. It's the largest online bookseller in Australia. If you're in America, you got Barnes & Noble, Walmart, for example. There's a whole bunch of different places you can get yourself a copy if you really want.
Yeah, awesome, man. Awesome. So there you go, guys. And if they want to follow you on your social media to keep up to date with what's going on in the world and what Michael thinks.
Yeah, if you want to keep up to date with half delusional rants, you can catch me on Twitter at the Stoic Coiner, and I'm known as stoic.xmr on Twitter, so you can follow me on there.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. This was episode 61, learning a bit about Monero, economics. I think we covered a lot today, mate.
Yeah.
And hey, go out, follow Michael at the Stoic. And also check out the book. I am going to have a read of this over the next couple of weeks. Thank you for bringing that in, Michael.
No worries.
And I'll have to get it signed off you before you leave.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
No worries, mate. Anytime. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.
Subscribe.